So I'm really interested, Rebecca, whether that's something when you found out about your mum and your sister's diagnosis, did you go looking online for that information? Did you find things that seemed credible, or did it open up a kind of a can of worms of misinformation that then you had to pick through in terms of understanding their prognosis?
Um, I don't think when I fully like understood it, I wouldn't say that I reached to Google.
Mm.
Um, not sure why, because I usually do, but um, no, I feel like we had quite an open household where if I did have a question, then I'd ask my sister or my mum, or within the charity, I'd ask people there. I feel like no, I didn't
You
really.
felt you had access to a support group that who could kind of help you understand things, maybe questions that your parents couldn't answer.
Yeah, but I felt like it was also just a normal for us.
Yeah.
So I didn't really need to ask questions. I didn't really need to know everything because it was just our life. We were just living it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, very exactly. It just became the new norm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So one thing that really struck me with the work that we were doing was looking at the impact of decision making, and Rich and Blake have already alluded to this in terms of educational impact, but we found that it impacted things like where people lived, for example, how far they traveled to go to university, what jobs they took, all sorts of things that really factored into this. So Rebecca, coming to you, how tricky has it been for you, or have you seen for other people, maybe through the support group that you're connected with, to kind of balance your own aspirations and that of any other obligations or sense of things that you want to do in terms of care responsibility? Like, has it dictated what you've done in terms of your next steps in life?
I feel like with that question, it's important to remember that being a sibling and being your own person are two separate things, and it's so important to kind of navigate through that. Um, Within my career ambitions, I wouldn't say that being having a sibling with a rare disease has impacted that at all. I've kind of followed in her footsteps with where she's gone to school or uni or anything like that. But I feel like I used to feel bad if I did something really well within school and she maybe didn't. But you just got to remember that pursuing your own dreams doesn't mean that you don't care about them.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like you just need to be honest about it. And if I was given an opportunity that she wouldn't, I'll talk to her about it and see how she'd feel, or if it's gonna impact the way she wants to carry on. But I feel like I've definitely taken my own step and I've realised that I can be my own person alongside her.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I know, Stefan, when we spoke recently, you mentioned that actually you've kind of got to a stage where you were so consumed by rare disease that even your sister was like, you need to get a bit of a life and get things outside of it. So you've made a conscious effort to kind of bring some other things into your life to balance out that. Is there anything you wanted to kind of add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I can divide my life before started working for the Rare Disease Organization after that, because before I was involved in some way, maybe volunteering for the events for my sisters. She has cystic fibrosis for her association, giving flyers and so on, but I didn't like haven't done anything else regarding awareness raising or uh, breeding or doing something things like that. But after starting working, I don't know, it's like the whole rare disease field like sucked me in and just pushing me with the information and making me more and more involved. That yeah, as you said, like after some time, my sister said like you should, you know, start finding another job because you are involved more than you think, because I started using the patient advocacy and medical languages like in the regular discussions. So but yeah, then you start thinking about that you need to have some other activities, or that the rare diseases should not be like the whole focus of your life, although it's important. Because my work in the rare diseases started because of my sister, because she has sent me the job application for the organization. Before that, I didn't even consider about working in the rare diseases, but after that, everything seemed so, let's say, like familiar with what the families are going through, and it pushed me to get involved more and more and find a way. It's like my way to uh, give back to the society and to help the rare disease community.
And it's a fine line, isn't it? I think I can definitely relate to that. I work in Rare Rev, I have a child with a rare disease, I run a charity as well. So sometimes it can become very all-consuming and you have to be mindful to step away from that a little bit. So I think that's a good reminder. So while I'm with you, Stefan, I know that this is something you feel really passionately about, and that is, siblings' ability to really advocate for their sibling with a rare disease, both in kind of everyday life, but also in that bigger community. And I guess that changes with age as well. So, I mean, I know you spoke to me about previously when we spoke about kind of advocating for her at school and what that looked like to now doing it on a bigger stage. What's your sort of perspective on the power and the role of a sibling in advocacy in both of those areas?
I would say that there is a really, really big space for the siblings to become powerful advocates, because sometimes the patients themselves cannot advocate for themselves because of the condition they are in. Parents can be overwhelmed with taking care for the child. So the siblings are the ones who should step in and push the lines, how to say. Because like be it advocating, as I told to you, like when we had the interview in the high school, when somebody was like bothering her and being there as a defender, or saying that she has somebody who is, her brother, that is gonna take care of her, that nobody should mess with her, and advocating on a bigger policy level for the changes of the healthcare law, social law, because you want to have the better policies for the rare disease patients and the community. So I think that siblings should be involved. From my perspective, looking on the area, like the location here in Serbia or the Western Balkans, that there are not that many siblings that are involved in patient organizations. Although I know some, they are not interested. They know what their siblings have, what is the disease, but they don't have any will to be involved into the patient advocacy, which I think is really bad, because if they have like the power and the will to speak about that to the society, then the whole society would look on the rare diseases with a different perspective.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting what you said there about with your sister when you were younger. And I guess that's an important thing, is that also understanding what level of involvement your sibling does want from you. So I know when my children were very little, my youngest, I mean, he must have been about 5 or 6. He said, "When I grow up, I'm going to be a scientist because I want to cure your condition." And my other son looked at him completely aghast and went, "Why would you want to do that? That's what makes me me." And he was quite horrified. So, it's important to understand where each other are in the journey. And just because you as a sibling see those challenges doesn't necessarily mean that's the perspective. Your sister didn't necessarily need that level of looking after. And so finding that line so there isn't conflict, because at the end of the day, you're still siblings as well, aren't you? Which comes with its own sort of complex relationships. So moving on to that, Blake, I know you and Ryan lived together. After you left the family home, you actually carried on living together, and you were quite a paramount in supporting him through that phase of his life. How do you see that family dynamic sort of evolving as you transition from into adulthood and into maybe more of an involved caregiving role? What did that look like for you, and how did you kind of work with him to preserve that sibling relationship that we're talking about, while still being able to give him that level of independence and care?
Well, great question. It's really important to keep in mind that as your loved one with the rare disease gets older, so is the entire family unit. And so, when physical necessities are required, as far as lifting or transferring, my mom and dad couldn't do that anymore as Ryan got older and heavier. And so then, because I was younger and stronger, that unfortunately and fortunately that fell on my shoulders. And so that was something, just from an obvious standpoint that we had to figure out how to navigate, but being careful that it wasn't also putting too much pressure on me to where then they weren't solely dependent on me to be the only person that could help with lifting and transferring. And this is something that a lot of people, if they haven't had to deal with it yet, most likely they will. And so making sure you can be proactive to find whether that's equipment or additional manpower, for lack of a better term, to be able to ensure you can take care of those just daily needs to lift someone on the toilet or to the shower. Because a lot of families, they don't have an able-bodied man around at 24/7 that can help when their loved one needs to get on the toilet, and that creates a ton of problems. Um, or the time, it's a time constraint too. And but then as you get older too, there's a difference of the um needing help going to the bathroom. And, most young men don't want to have their mom help them use the bathroom. That's a major issue that isn't talked about enough. And, that was a big thing that Ryan and I always stressed was, I wanted to give him as much um, autonomy and privacy so he wouldn't have to have some stranger as his caregiver helping him with some of his most intimate needs. And I think just as most and if you can be as proactive and have the right foresight to try to identify the best additional backup resources as possible and come up with clever ways to adapt to these challenges, and learn from others. That's why conversations like this are really helpful, because sometimes you don't realize the obstacle you're going to be right in the middle of until it's too late. And the last thing you want to be dealing with is um, shooting from the hip and risking somebody falling because you don't have the right person available to help. Because, so, anyways, I don't know if that's answered your
Yeah,
question.
no, absolutely. And did it put, were there times when that put strain on your relationship with Ryan? Because obviously, in the normal sequence of events, most siblings wouldn't necessarily want their older brother or sister helping them with those care needs either. So were there kind of flashpoints with that? Did you have to have conversations around, kind of boundaries and what his sort of preferences were, or like how did you manage that so that either one of you didn't get frustrated by that level of kind of care?
You have to have a sense of humor with things. And, luckily, there's certainly a balance, and it's a balancing act between putting yourself in their shoes, but also having respect for your own needs. And not like I have a lot of back problems because I lifted him constantly at very strange angles and positions, and I know that he felt really guilty about that. But at the same time, when you're out of options or you have very limited options, you just make with the best you can and ensure that they can be as grateful and thoughtful to ensure that you're relieving uh, stress as much as possible. Um, but as long as you can be proactive, and I know we're going to discuss this later, there are ways to ensure that the sibling relationship can always be the priority, and that it doesn't get blurred as the caregiver, because I know I went through that and it was a really tough transition getting out of that, and it put a real strain on our relationship for a while. But once we found the right resources to take the majority of the pressure off of me, it it was like the fog cleared, and he and I were best friends again. And I wasn't just there as the reliable body that could be
Yeah.
able to help him with all these needs.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And Rich, obviously there's much that can also be celebrated about being a rare sibling. I think it's really important to say that it does bring a lot of joy as well. Can you talk to us about some of the more positive aspects and maybe the personal growth opportunities that siblings experience while living in a family, being raised in a family with rare disease, and having some element of caregiving responsibility?
Yeah, I think Blake might have touched on this earlier, but I think it increases, your empathy just for different situations. I don't know that there is a normal quote unquote. And so I think having the experience, caregiving, but also just growing up in that environment, I think it just gives you a really unique perspective in life that some people are different. That's okay. Like everybody's normal is however they sort of define it based on their own circumstance. Um, I don't know, maybe it just makes you a more tolerant person, more patient.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say that there were kind of experiences that as a family that you had that you possibly wouldn't have had if rare disease hadn't been in your life that you feel have improved you or given you kind of experiences that just others would not have had?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, you like unique experiences. I mean, I think everybody touched on that's spoken so far on the panel has touched on a little bit of, what unique experiences they went through. I mean, I don't know that I'd call my experience a unique experience. I mean, it just was my experience and everybody's different. But yeah, I mean, I think it makes you, I mean, like walking down a sidewalk, for instance, like you sort of take notice of like, are there, could a wheelchair go through this? Or like, is this an accessible like place? Fighting all sorts of different battles with insurance, with schools, that, sort of just want to turn a blind eye to disability and accessibility, is a big one. I don't know, it just kind of makes you, I don't know, more durable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned there about school. Is that something that you had? Because I know that that's come through with the work we've done, that really there's very little by way of support within schools for a sibling. So while there might be all manner of pathways in place to support the person with the rare disease, maybe there may not be recognition that a sibling is missing school because of appointments or is very tired because they might have been up at night. Or, was that something that you had, Rich, any kind of awareness or any recognition within the school setting that perhaps you also had some challenges?
Yeah, I mean, not so much me, but I mean, definitely Terry. Like, I think high school wasn't as bad because it's a smaller community. Once you get to know like the administrators and stuff, you sort of just fall into like the everyday, rhythm of high school. College was much harder for him. Definitely was a harder experience, even like getting simple resources. Um, that was much more of an everyday fight, to be able to, I mean, just like common sense things like, okay, this is where like the lift is going to pick you up to take you across campus. And like the maintenance guys hadn't like plowed any of it. And so it's like, I think there's a degree of just lacking common sense, especially at some of these higher level universities where you would sort of think it's the opposite. Um, I mean, eventually it worked out, but it's like, you got to fight the battles,
So did you
make the
feel called in
threats,
to kind
blah,
of
blah, blah.
advocate for him in those moments? Like, were you stepping in to kind of be a voice to advocate in those and learning to do that at that age for these little challenges?
It, yeah, I mean, the stuff we had to do, like, I don't know, you have no idea. Like, I mean, at one point it was like, I don't want to go there. But I mean, it worked at the end of the day. It's just, you got to fight. And it's
Yeah,
like,
sure.
okay, cool. And the scope and scale of that fight varies with the like size of the problem. And so for us, it's like, okay, can we get insurance to cover this treatment? And that was a whole fight that like ended successful, well, quasi successfully. Um, all the way down to like, can we like get on this bus? Like, is it accessible? So I don't know. I don't know, it just is what it is.
You become quite adept at being resourceful and problem solving.